hello everyone, and welcome to the Marshall W. Allworth Planetarium. My name is Jessica, I'm the director and will be your tour guide to the night sky this evening. You've also met Spencer and Braden, two of our students helping out with the show. So for our show tonight, since it's the first Wednesday of the month, we are doing our Exploring the Monthly Sky, where we'll take a look at the September sky and I'll tell you what sort of things you can find in it. Now, during the show, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I can't always see hands from the back, so you're welcome to just ask your question out loud. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can always come talk to me after the show as well. Now, during the show as well, if you need to leave for any reason, you are more than welcome to do so. You'll just exit through the same door you came in. Just, of course, be careful because it does get dark in here, but that is why we have the glow strips around the edges of the wall so that you can find your way out. All right, that's enough announcement stuff from me. I'm gonna head to the back and we're gonna get started. All right. So we are going to get ourselves started here with the current sky. We've got the sun starting to set over in the west. And first thing we're going to do is not go too much further into the future. We're just going to go a little bit further to get to sunset. And I'm pointing this out because, and let me bring the west over to the front so we can see it. If we head out at sunset and look to the west, Venus is showing up really low on the horizon there and the west at sunset. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but it is there. You can see it. And tonight the moon will be nearby, but the moon changes position very quickly from night to night. So it will not be right beside Venus tomorrow. All right, let me turn us back north. And then we are going to progress even later into the night. And we're going to go until the sun is set nice and far down below the horizon. And we are in total darkness. Now, the view we're getting right now is not quite the view we would get in the city, since we do have things like light pollution. But all of the constellations and things that I'm going to be talking about are pretty easily seen. And of course, if you can get out of the city with less light pollution, you'll see more and more of the night sky. So we're going to get started here in the north with a few common constellations that we can find. And our first set of stars is going to be these 7 stars here in the northwest. Where's my laser pointer? There it is. These 7 stars here in the northwest. We commonly refer to them as the Big Dipper. But our Big Dipper here is not actually a constellation. It is an asterism. So that means it's a smaller, more recognizable part of a larger constellation. So what we know of as the Big Dipper is actually the 7 brightest stars in the Greek constellation of Ursa Major, or the Big Bear. So in order to see the entire bear, we have to add in some other stars. The handle of the Big Dipper is the tail of our bear. The cup of the Big Dipper is kind of the back half of the body. And then those extra stars we added on form the head, legs, and the rest of the bear there. Now, before we move from here, there's a star in the Big Bear and Big Dipper that I want to point out to you. And it is this star right here, kind of in the middle of the handle. It forms kind of like the crook or the bend of the handle. Now, to our eyes, you may notice that it looks like a single star. But it's not actually a single star. There are actually two stars here. And they are named Miser and Alcor. So this is, ooh, that label's going a little funny. Let's just take those away. We're going to pretend like that didn't happen. So these two stars here in the crook of the handle of the Big Dipper are Miser and Alcor. They are what we call a visual binary. So they're not actually two stars orbiting around each other. They just look really close together from our vantage point here on the Earth. And for people with really good vision, you can actually see two individual stars with just your eye. In fact, a lot of early cultures used this star group as a vision test to see, how good your vision was. Others went a slightly different route and they used it as like an age test because, typically as you get older, your vision starts to get worse. So yeah, that's something that you can look out for next time you head out. See if you can see two stars there or if they look just like one. I'm going to tell you, my vision is terrible, so I definitely just see one star. All right. So from here, we're going to head on to another group of stars, another constellation. We're going to be looking for the Little Dipper and the Little Bear. Now, this group, this constellation can be harder to see, harder to find, simply because the stars aren't as bright as the stars in the Big Dipper. But we have a trick. So we're going to use the Big Dipper to help us. We're going to take the front two stars in the cup of the Big Dipper. Those are our pointer stars. And if we follow them, they point us across to this bright star here named Polaris. Now, Polaris, you may know it instead as the North Star, but it is also the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. So by finding the Big Dipper and taking those pointer stars and hopping across to finding our North Star, that also finds us our Little Dipper. Now, our Little Dipper is also our Little Bear. No extra stars here, though. The handle is the tail of the Little Bear. The cup is the body of the Little Bear. If you think this looks less like a bear and more like a squirrel, so do I. But it's even our big bear, right, looks weird. Bears don't have long tails like this. They have stubby little, short little stubby tails. So there's a reason that these bears look weird and have these long tails. And it's simply because Zeus, in order to get them up into the sky, he picks them up by those little bear tails and spun them around and flung them into the sky. And so getting spun around by their tails stretched out the bear tails. And so that's why we see these two bears with long tails in our night sky. All right. For our next little bit of night sky, we're going to head ourselves over to the west. So I'm just going to turn the sky so the west is now up front for us. And we're going to do a little bit more star hopping over here. This time, we're going to use the handle of the Big Dipper. You'll notice that it's curved or arced. So what we're going to do is follow the arc of that handle across to this bright star here named Arcturus. So the saying is you arc to Arcturus. Now, Arcturus is a very bright sky, really prominent, easy to see. So if you're seeing a super bright sky in the west this time of year, you're probably looking at Arcturus. And once you find it, you can then look for the constellation of Bootes. Now, Bootes kind of looks like a kite. I think it looks kind of like an ice cream cone. It's supposed to be a man. Yeah. Really got to use your imagination here. This is a great example of the fact that, a lot of times constellations don't look the way you quote unquote think they should, right? Some of them require a good bit of imagination to see the pictures that they're supposedly depicting. But right next to our weirdly shaped man Boötes is this kind of U shape of stars. I really like this one. This is Corona Borealis, or the Northern Crown. And it does kind of look like you would expect. Maybe it looks a little bit more like a tiara, but honestly, I'm going to give them this one because it looks pretty good. Looks pretty close. And then right next to our crown sits our hero, Hercules. There he is. He's a little bit upside down from this point of view, but that's okay. You can see him there across the night sky. And Hercules has one of my favorite objects to look at through either a pair of binoculars or a telescope here during the summer and into the early fall. So if we look kind of right on his right side there, there is an object called the Great Globular Cluster of Hercules. And we can't really see anything with our eyes, but again, with a pair of binoculars or a small telescope, this is kind of what you would see. So a globular cluster is a group of stars, usually tens to hundreds of thousands of stars that are packed really close together. And because you have so many stars so close together, when you look at it through a telescope, to me, it looks like glittering jewels. I've also heard it described as looking like a puff of glitter in the eyepiece. It's really pretty and one of my favorite things to take a look at. All right. For our next little bit, we are now going to head ourselves a little bit further around over to the southeast. And we're going to look high overhead. Because high overhead, we can see three bright stars that trace out what's known as the summer triangle. So we have Vega, Deneb, and Altair. And those three together make the summer triangle because it's a triangle that you prominently see during the summer. Makes sense. Super great name. Now, each of these stars that is a corner of the summer triangle, they are each part of their own constellation. Vega is part of Lyra the lyre, or Lyra the harp. A lyre is an early stringed instrument, so similar to a harp. And based off of which art you look at, it can look a little bit more like a harp. It can look like more of like an early guitar. Just like we've seen, it does take some imagination with a lot of these constellations. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret them and to draw out those pictures. So it really just depends on which art you're looking at as how they will draw Lyra. But the other corner, or the next corner, Altair, is part of Aquila the eagle. Now, in this rendition of the eagle, I think it looks a little bit more like a stingray. With the art on, you can see the eagle a little bit better. In this art version, we can see that the eagle is actually carrying a man. This man is named Ganymede. And he is actually being brought up to Mount Olympus because Zeus wanted him to live up on Mount Olympus and be kind of like the water bearer, the cup bearer. So you may actually know Ganymede as Aquarius. He is the cup bearer or the water bearer for the gods up on Mount Olympus. All right. The last corner of our summer triangle is the constellation of Cygnus the Swan. And this one does look pretty dang like it should. We have those long wings and, of course, the long swan neck. And there we have Cygnus kind of flying through the Milky Way. Now, in the Summer Triangle, there are a couple of other really cool things that you can look at if you do have a small telescope. So the first is actually in Lyra, right in kind of in between these two stars here. We have something called the Ring Nebula. Now, a nebula is basically a gas cloud in space. And it's called the Ring Nebula because it looks like a ring. Again, super clever name. Astronomers are great at this. So this is what we refer to as a planetary nebula. So a little bit of a misnomer, doesn't have anything to do with planets, but it's actually the result of the death of a small star like our sun. And what we're seeing is all of the hot gases that were once part of that star. If you do look at this through a telescope, you won't see colors quite as easily as you might see them here. It'll be definitely a bit more gray. So a lot of people joke that it looks like the ghost of a Cheerio. So that's what you should expect. If you attempt to look for the Ring Nebula, you're going to see a Cheerio ghost up there. But yeah, and that's what's going to happen to our sun in about 5 billion years. So, nothing we really have to worry about, but that is what's going to happen. The other one that I wanted to point out is kind of in between, and this one is definitely harder to find with your telescope because it's kind of in between these two constellations. But if you are able to find it, this is the Dumbbell Nebula because it kind of looks like a dumbbell. This is another planetary nebula. So like the Ring Nebula, it's just a slightly different shape. But yeah, it's another really cool one to take a look at. And again, you won't see the colors quite as well with just your eye. You will see more of the kind of grayscale, but it's very cool to see. All right. For our last little bit, I am first off, let's check out what other planets we can see. So I'm fairly certain, yeah, there we go. Not long after we get into our darkness, Saturn rises not too long after sunset. So that is a great object to try and find. It is fairly bright, so it should be pretty easy to pick out, and you can see it with just your eyes. If you do have a pair of binoculars or a telescope, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. And you can even make out those rings and maybe even a couple of the bigger moons around Saturn. Now, something that's starting to make the news circuit, so I want to go ahead and get ahead of this. You're going to start seeing headlines saying that the rings are disappearing next year. They're not actually disappearing. What's happening is as we both are orbiting the sun, the planets are both tilted different directions. And so over the next coming months, we're going to view Saturn more and more edge on its rings. And those rings are very thin. So when we view them edge on, they're going to seem like they disappear. So that's going to happen into early next year is when we get our full edge on. And then we'll start to see them again as we come off of that kind of viewing configuration. But no, the rings aren't literally disappearing. We're just not going to be able to see them because of how our viewing angle is changing. But so if you want to see the rings, now is the time to do it. Saturn is also reaching what we call opposition this month, meaning it's directly opposite the sun, which is the best time to view the planet. So really encourage it if you can get out and see Saturn this month. Right next to it is Neptune. Now, unfortunately, Neptune, you do have to have binoculars or a telescope to see. You cannot see it with just your eyes. But if you are able to look at it through some sort of assisted viewing device, you will see a very, very tiny pale blue circle for the planet. You should be able to tell that it is a circle and not just a point of light like stars look. And it should have a pale blue color to it. All right. Now I'm going to turn us a little bit more northeast. And we're going to do our last set of constellations for the evening. Because we are starting to see our fall constellations, and most of the constellations for what we refer to here as the Great Fall Tragedy are visible. So I figured I could show those to you. So we're going to start with a really bright, easy constellation to find. It's this big W, high up in the northeast. This is the constellation of Cassiopeia, the Queen. And she is generally pictured as she's sitting on her throne, because it can be a challenge, to turn a W into a queen. So usually she's pictured sitting on her throne. And again, depending on the art you see, she may be oriented slightly differently. This is how this program draws her. You might see her drawn slightly different depending on the art. Again, a lot of this is up to interpretation, but that is our Queen Cassiopeia. Now, she is not alone. Next to her, we can see what looks like an upside down house. That is our king, King Cepheus. And again, we see him kind of sitting in his throne. And again, depending on the art, he may be oriented slightly differently. But there is our king and queen, Queen Cassiopeia and King Cepheus. Now, our king and queen have a daughter. Her name is Andromeda. And she is located on the other side of our queen right here. And she is generally depicted with her arms out wide because she is chained up to a rock. And I'll explain that in a second. But before I do, I want to point something else out. Do you see right next to Andromeda's hip? You see this little fuzzy blob here? That is the Andromeda Galaxy, named such because it's found next to the constellation of Andromeda. This is the only galaxy that you can see with your unaided eye. You do not have to have a telescope to see it. And it's located about 2.5 million light years away. And we can see it with just our eyes. Now, if you do have a telescope, you'll see it in a bit more detail. The Andromeda Galaxy is a spiral disk galaxy just like our own. And so you can see that in a bit more detail there. But let's start our story. So, our king and queen here are not very nice people. In fact, they are very awful to the subjects they rule over, and they're also really vain. And they went so far as to declare Cassiopeia more beautiful than the gods and goddesses up on Mount Olympus, especially more beautiful than the goddess of beauty herself, Aphrodite. And if you know anything about Greek mythology, you don't mess with Aphrodite. So they got really upset when they heard the king and queen made this bold claim. And I will give them some credit. They didn't immediately attack the king and queen. They gave them a chance to kind of backpedal and, take it all back. But no, Queen Cassiopeia and King Cepheus, they held firm, said, nope, I'm more beautiful, get over it. And so the gods were like, all right, well, time to punish you. And they decide to send a huge sea monster after their kingdom. Well, the king and queen, again, not being very nice people, think of a solution. They decide that if they chain up their only daughter, Andromeda, out in the ocean, the sea monster will take her and leave their kingdom alone. And that is why Andromeda is often depicted with her arms stretched out because she is chained to this rock in the middle of the ocean, watching as the sea monster heads her way. Now, I'm going to pause there because we have 2 more characters to introduce. The hero of our story sits just below our queen Cassiopeia, And that is our dear Perseus. He looks like a really funny stick figure. But this is Perseus. And you'll see there's this really bright star here. This star right here is named Algol. It's sometimes referred to as the red blinking demon eye. Because you do actually, if you watch it over the course of a couple of days, you will see that the brightness of the star does actually change over time. It'll get a little bit dimmer for a few hours and then brighten back up. And then a few days later, it'll dim again and then brighten back up. And so these early cultures noticed that. And that is where we get a lot of these nicknames for the star, like the demon's blinking eye. The reason this is happening is because Algol is actually two stars in what we refer to as an eclipsing binary. So from our point of view, the two stars are passing in front of each other. And so whenever one of the stars gets blocked, some of that light is blocked from getting to us. So we see the star's brightness dim. We see it get dimmer. So that's what's happening there. But the reason it's associated with the kind of demon eye is you'll notice that it's in kind of a head, a severed head that Perseus is holding. This is kind of Perseus's claim to fame. He's the guy who killed Medusa, right? Medusa, if you don't know, she's a gorgon. She has snakes for hair, has magic powers so that if you look her in the eyes, you turn to stone. And Perseus was able to kill her. And he was actually on his way back home from slaying Medusa when he came across Andromeda. But he wasn't alone. He had his faithful steed with him. You may know it as the wonderful Pegasus, the flying horse. And I'm going to put the constellation up for you. It's on the other side of Andromeda, but that's Pegasus. It's a square. I still don't fully understand how we go from square to flying horse. I think this is a really good time to point out that around the time they were coming up with these constellations is also around the time that they started learning how to like ferment and brew beer and wine and stuff. Not sure if there's a connection, but yeah. So there's Pegasus. So Perseus is riding Pegasus back home after he's killed Medusa when he hears these cries for help, and he sees Andromeda chained to the rock and the sea monster heading her way, and he thinks really quickly and pulls out Medusa's head, points it at the sea monster, who then turns to stone and sinks down to the bottom of the ocean. And that allows Perseus to fly down and free Andromeda, and they both hop back on Pegasus and fly off and live happily ever after. But that leaves our king and queen still unpunished. So that is why they are in the night sky. That is the punishment that the gods finally decided on, is to chain them up in the night sky. Again, depending on the art, the story may slightly change. In some stories, they were chained up in a way so that they could never look at each other again. That way they can't, admire each other's beauty or whatever. They have to always, be looking away from each other. In other stories, it talks about how the gods were very purposeful in where they put Cassiopeia, and that for 6 months of the year, she's upside down, which means all of the blood is going to rush to her face and she's not going to be that pretty anymore. So again, depending on the story and the art, there's some slight variations, but ultimately they are imprisoned in the night sky for, being so bold as to claim that they're better looking than the gods. All right. With that, I'm going to fast forward time a little bit more. And as we do, around 11, the planet Uranus rises up. Now, just like with Neptune, Uranus you cannot see with your naked eye. You have to have a telescope or a pair of binoculars. And again, just like with Neptune, if you are able to see it through a telescope, you will see a pale blue circle. But then right after midnight, we also get Jupiter and Mars rising up. Both of these you can see with your naked eye. You do not need a telescope. Jupiter especially is very bright. It will be brighter than everything else around it. But if you do have a telescope, you may be able to spot the stripes on the planet. And if it's positioned, oriented correctly, you may even catch a glimpse of the great red spot, that big storm on Jupiter. And you could also catch a glimpse of some of the big moons around Jupiter as well. And then for Mars, you may actually notice that Mars has a noticeable red tinge to it when you see it. And that's because the planet itself is red. And we can see that. And that's often why we see this planet associated with war in different cultures, because of that red color that's noticeable to the eye. All right, we're going to keep going. As we go through the night, we're starting to see some winter constellations before sunrise, because whether we like it or not, winter is coming. And just before the sun comes up, we get our last planet, Mercury, visible there. So if you're really eager to see all of the planets, you can do it. You would just have to observe right from sunset all the way up to sunrise to be able to see all of them. So I personally am a night owl and usually stay up all night anyway. So if you are also so inclined, you could catch a glimpse of all of the planets up. But with that, we're going to keep letting time pass. Let the sun rise up over the east, bringing us back to daytime and to the end of our show. And so with that, I'm going to slowly turn our lights up. And yeah, before you head out, if you haven't found them already, in front of the TV at the main entrance, there are some star charts. You're welcome to take one of those with you to help you find all of these stars and constellations we talked about. It does also have the planets marked on there and some other fun information. Yeah, thank you so much for coming out. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at the September night sky. I will be back here if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you again for coming. Have a safe trip home and a wonderful rest of your week.